The prairie stretched endlessly beneath a gray, wind-torn sky. The kind of sky that made the world feel hollow. A broken wagon sat at the edge of a dirt trail. One wheel splintered, the other half buried in mud around it. The scent of rain mixed with the faint, sour smell of smoke ghosts of a campfire long since gone cold inside the wagon. A small movement stirred beneath a frayed, quilted girl, no more than 12, lifted her head. Her hair was tangled with straw. Her cheeks streaked with dust. Beside her lay two smaller forms, a boy of about 7, sleeping fitfully, and a baby wrapped in a torn blanket that barely kept the cold away. The girl pressed her hand against the baby's chest. Counting the slow, shallow breaths, relief washed over her. It was still breathing. They had been there for days. Though she had lost track of how many time had blurred into hunger, fear, and silence, her parents had left the wagon to find help after one of the horses had broken its leg during a storm. They promised to come back by nightfall, but night had come and gone 3 times now. And still there was no sign of them. At first, she waited, clutching the baby and whispering to her brother that everything would be fine on the second day. She began to doubt it. By the third, she knew the truth. No one was coming. Her father's hat still lay by the wheel. His rifle gone, his boot prints fading in the mud. Whatever fate had met them out there. She sensed it was final. Her brother woke with a weak whimper. "I'm hungry," he said. His lips cracked. She handed him a scrap of hard biscuit, the last bit she had rationed for herself. She took nothing. Hunger had already carved a dull ache into her ribs. But she had learned that crying made it worse. The baby stirred again, fussing softly. The wind picked up, carrying with it the whisper of thunder. She knew another storm was coming. She dragged a torn canvas over the wagon's opening, anchoring it with a bucket and a piece of wood when lightning cracked across the plain. She pressed the baby close and whispered lullabies she barely remembered. Her brother crawled beside her, trembling. The storm roared for hours, shaking the wagon like a toy when it finally passed. The world was silent again, so silent it hurt. The next morning, the girl ventured outside. Her bare feet sank into the wet ground. The prairie stretched in every direction, flat and merciless. There was no smoke from nearby camps, no signs of life, only the rustle of wind through tall grass. She searched for food and found a few dry berries, a crust of bread left in the wagon box, and a small tin cup for collecting rainwater when she returned. Her brother was staring at her with wide eyes. "Are we gonna die?" he asked. She froze, unsure what to say. The word die felt too heavy, too real. "No," she whispered finally. "I won't let us." That night, as darkness fell once more, she huddled her siblings beneath the blanket. The prairie night was full of strange sounds, coyotes calling, crickets humming, the endless sigh of wind. She couldn't sleep. Each sound felt like a threat, a reminder that the world had forgotten them. But somewhere beneath the fear, a spark began to grow. It wasn't hope exactly, more like defiance. The world might be vast and cruel, but she wasn't ready to surrender to it. She had 2 small lives depending on her, and that was enough to keep her fighting. As the first light of dawn crept across the sky, she made a promise silently to herself. She would keep them alive. No matter what, the wilderness might have taken their parents, but it would not take them unseen beyond the horizon. A horseman rode slowly down the trail, guided by the faint smoke of their dead. Campfire, the moment that would change everything, was already on its way. The sun had just begun to break through the morning clouds when Jacob Hollis spotted the wrecked wagon. He had been riding the southern fence line of his property, checking for damage after the storm, when the glint of metal caught his eye. His horse, Dusty, snorted at the sight. Uneasy, Jacob tugged on the reins, squinting toward the horizon. A wagon in that condition, this far out from town, was never a good sign. He guided Dusty closer, boots crunching over the wet grass. As he drew near, the scene became clear: mud-smeared wheels, splintered wood, and no horses in sight. The air carried a bitter smell of ash and damp earth. Jacob's stomach tightened. He'd seen too many wrecks like this over the years, usually ending the same way. Still, he dismounted and approached, one hand resting on the worn grip of his revolver. "Hello?" His voice echoed faintly in the stillness. "Anybody here?" At first, there was only silence. Then, a faint sound of cough, followed by a small whimper. Jacob froze. He rounded the side of the wagon. And there they were, 3 children huddled under a quilt. Pale and trembling, the oldest, a thin girl with tangled hair and wary eyes, glared up at him like a cornered animal. She clutched a stick in one hand. Ready to swing behind her, a boy sat half asleep, his face smeared with dirt, and in her lap, a baby whimpered weakly. Jacob lowered his voice. "Easy there. Kid, I'm not here to hurt you." The girl didn't respond. Her eyes darted to his holster, then back to his face. Measuring him, Jacob took a cautious step back, showing his empty hands. He knew that look. Fear mixed with the kind of pride only hardship could teach. "How long have you been out here?" he asked quietly. The girl said nothing. She just tightened her hold on the baby and looked toward the horizon, as if waiting for someone to appear, but there was no one. No footprints, no trail, just emptiness. Jacob exhaled, feeling a pang in his chest he hadn't felt in years. He saw his late daughter's face and the girl's eyes, those same brown flecks, that same stubborn chin. He'd buried his little girl and his wife years ago, vowing never to open his heart again, but here were 3 children, barely clinging to life, and something inside him shifted. He knelt slowly, pulling a canteen from his saddlebag. "Here," he said, offering it. "You look thirsty." The girl hesitated, then took it. Letting her brother drink first, Jacob noticed the way her hands trembled, the way she kept the baby's head tucked close even while she drank herself. "Your folks around?" he asked. The girl's jaw tightened after a pause. She shook her head once, quick and final. That was all he needed to know. Jacob sighed and looked around the clearing. "All right then," he murmured. "You can't stay here. There's a storm brewing again tonight, and you won't survive another one of those." The girl's eyes widened. "Where will you take us?" "Town first," Jacob replied. "Maybe the sheriff can—" "No," she interrupted, her voice sharp. "Please, don't take us there." Her fear was immediate and raw. Jacob could see it plain as day. She'd been through enough, and the thought of being separated from her siblings terrified her more than the wilderness. He rubbed the back of his neck. Torn, he wasn't looking to raise anyone. He lived alone on his ranch with a couple of hired hands and too many ghosts. But as he looked at the children, their hollow cheeks, their shivering bodies, he knew what his choice had to be. "All right," he said finally. "You'll come with me just for a bit. We'll get you warm. Get you fed." The girl didn't thank him, but she didn't resist either. Jacob lifted the baby carefully, wrapping it in his coat. The girl helped her brother climb onto Dusty, then mounted behind Jacob, clutching the baby to her chest as they rode away from the wrecked wagon. Jacob glanced back one last time. The broken frame of the wagon stood against the gray sky like a grave marker. He didn't know it yet, but this moment, the decision to take in 3 nameless children, would change the rest of his life. The Holly Ranch sat nestled in a wide valley where the plains rolled gently toward the foothills. It wasn't a grand place, just a weathered house, a few outbuildings, and miles of open land, but to the 3 children, it might as well have been a kingdom. When Jacob first brought them there, they clung to each other, silent and watchful, as if afraid the earth might swallow them up if they spoke too loud. The hired hands, old Hank and young Mateo, exchanged wary glances. "Boss," Hank muttered that first night, "we ain't running an orphanage." Jacob ignored him. He had already made up his mind. The children needed a place, and his heart, though scarred by loss, had begun to thaw. He gave them a small room off the kitchen. It smelled of wood smoke and fresh hay, with a single narrow bed and a cot he dragged in from the barn. The girl made no complaint, just thanked him with a small nod. The baby, fed and wrapped in blankets, fell asleep almost immediately, while the boy stared at the fire like he'd never seen one before. Jacob soon learned that the girl was the unspoken leader among them. She handled the chores without prompting, fed her siblings before herself, and never asked for help. Yet something about her haunted him, the way she refused to say her name. "You got a name, don't you?" he asked one evening as she milked the old cow in the barn. She paused, the pail half full. "Don't remember," she said softly, eyes fixed on the foam. Jacob frowned. "You sure?" She shrugged. "Mama used to call me sweetheart, I think. But I don't remember what came before that." It wasn't a lie. Trauma had washed away pieces of her memory, the names, the places, even the sound of her mother's voice. The only thing she remembered clearly was running. Jacob studied her a long moment. "Well," he said finally, "we'll just have to find you one when you're ready." The days settled into rhythm. The children learned the ways of the ranch, feeding chickens, hauling water, sweeping the porch. The boy, Sam, started to smile again, especially when Mateo let him ride the horses around the paddock. The baby whom the girl had taken to calling Lily grew stronger each week. But the girl herself stayed guarded, quiet, and distant, never fully letting go of her fear that this peace could vanish as quickly as it came at night. Jacob sometimes heard her whispering to her siblings, promising they'd never be taken away again. Once, he caught her peeking out the window, staring at the stars as if waiting for someone. He realized she was still expecting her parents to come for her, even though deep down she knew they never would. One afternoon, the sheriff rode out to the ranch. He had heard about the wrecked wagon and came to ask questions. "You seen any sign of those missing travelers?" he asked Jacob. "Family of 5, last seen headed north?" Jacob felt the girl stiffen behind him. He glanced back at her small, terrified face and lied without hesitation. "No, Sheriff, haven't seen a soul." The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Well, if you do, you let me know." After the man rode off, Jacob knelt beside the girl. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "I won't let anyone take you." For the first time, her eyes met his without fear. "Why?" she whispered. He hesitated. "Because everyone deserves a chance to belong," he said simply. That night, the girl helped him fix the fence under the setting sun. He noticed she smiled once, barely, fleetingly, but enough to remind him that light could still find its way into dark places. And though the house still felt quiet and strange, it no longer felt empty. It was a house without names, but not without hope. Winter came early that year, creeping down from the mountains before the last leaves had even fallen. The days grew shorter, the nights colder, and the wind never seemed to rest. For Jacob Hawley, it was the kind of season he had learned to endure in silence, but for the 3 children under his roof, it was their first true test of survival. Snow fell heavy across the valley, blanketing the land in a white silence that could swallow sound. The ranch grew still. Work slowed to feeding livestock, chopping firewood, and keeping the fire alive. Jacob spent his days teaching the boy, Sam, how to carry feed buckets and break ice in the trough. The nameless girl, quick to learn and quicker to act, took on more than her share. She mended clothes, kept Lily warm, and helped Mateo repair the old barn roof before the snows grew too deep. But for all her courage, Jacob could see the strain in her eyes. She didn't complain, never asked for rest, yet her hands were always raw and red from cold. He offered her gloves once, but she refused. "You need them more," she said, and went back to her chores. Then came the blizzard. It started with a low wind, a strange howling that swept across the hills. The horses grew restless. The sky turned a bruised gray, and by dusk, snow was falling in heavy sheets. Jacob stood on the porch, frowning at the horizon. He knew what was coming, a whiteout storm, the kind that could trap a man for days. He secured the shutters, checked the livestock, and brought extra firewood inside. By nightfall, the storm struck with a fury that shook the walls. The children huddled near the fireplace, the baby crying softly as the wind howled like a beast outside. Jacob tried to make light of it, telling stories of his own boyhood winters, but his eyes kept flicking to the door-dot at dawn. The storm hadn't let up. The snow piled halfway up the windows. Worse, Jacob realized they were nearly out of medicine. Lily had developed a harsh cough that rattled in her small chest. The salve and herbs he had were almost gone. He'd have to ride to the trading post 20 miles away through the storm. "You can't go," the girl said, panic flashing in her eyes as he saddled Dusty. "You'll freeze out there." Jacob smiled faintly. "I've faced worse. I'll be back before dark." He pressed his coat around his shoulders, mounted up, and disappeared into the storm. The door closed, and the world grew still again save for the scream of the wind. Hours passed. Snow beat against the roof, and the house shuddered with each gust. Sam cried at the sound of wolves howling somewhere in the distance. The girl loaded Jacob's rifle, her small hands trembling but steady. She set the barrel across her knees and waited. When night fell, the storm grew worse. The wolves came closer, their shapes moving faintly beyond the window. The girl sat awake by the fire, rifle in hand, ready to protect her brother and baby sister. She remembered her mother's face for the first time that night, kind, warm and fading, and whispered a prayer she barely understood. Sometime before dawn, the door banged open. Snow burst inward as Jacob stumbled inside, half frozen, clutching a small sack of medicine. His face was white with frost, his hands trembling, but his eyes softened when he saw the children still alive, the fire still burning. The girl rushed to help him, pulling off his coat and pressing his frozen fingers near the flame. "You came back," she whispered. "Promised I would," Jacob said hoarsely. For 3 days, they stayed snowbound, tending the baby, mending clothes, and sharing stories to drown out the silence. When the sun finally broke through the clouds, it cast golden light over the snow, a light that felt almost holy. That winter storm had tested them all, but when it passed, something unspoken had changed. They were no longer strangers bound by circumstance. They were a family born not of blood, but of fire, courage, and survival. By the time the snow melted and the valley turned green again, the Holly Ranch had come alive with new rhythm and laughter. Spring had returned, softening the land, and for the first time in a long while, Jacob Hawley felt that his home wasn't empty anymore. The children had settled into the ranch like they had always belonged there. The baby, Lily, now toddled around the porch, chasing chickens while Mateo pretended to be terrified of her. Sam had grown stronger, his face tanned from working outdoors. And Jacob had even begun teaching him how to rope cattle, but it was the girl, the quiet, nameless one, who had changed the most. She smiled now often, and not easily, but when she did, it was genuine. She could saddle a horse, cook biscuits over a fire, and tell Sam stories that made him laugh until he cried. She was still cautious, still guarded, but her fear had loosened its grip. The ranch had given her a kind of peace she'd never known. Then one afternoon, as the wind carried the scent of blooming sage through the valley, a familiar sound echoed down the dirt road, the clop of hooves. Slow and heavy, Jacob looked up from the corral to see the sheriff riding toward the house. His heart sank. "Afternoon?" "Hawley," the sheriff called, tipping his hat as he dismounted. "Heard you had company up this way." Jacob wiped his hands on his shirt, masking his unease. "Just the hands and me," he said casually. The sheriff's eyes wandered toward the porch, where the children stood frozen. Sam ducked behind the doorframe. The girl stood her ground, but Jacob could see her trembling. The sheriff took off his gloves. pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "You might want to hear me out. Got a letter from Fort Ponder. They've been looking for 3 children survivors of a wagon ambush last fall. The description fits these young'uns." Jacob's jaw tightened. "That so?" "Yep, word is their kin were attacked by bandits. The law's been searching for them ever since. They belong in the orphanage till someone can claim them proper." The words hit like a hammer. Jacob forced a calm. He didn't feel. "They got a home here," he said firmly. The sheriff sighed. "Ain't up to me. Holly law says." "I don't give a damn what the law says," Jacob cut in, his voice sharp as a whip. "You think the law cared when those children were left to die out there?" The sheriff's gaze softened, but duty weighed on him. "I know what you've done for em, Jacob, but you can't just keep em. If you want to make it right, there's a process. You file papers. Prove you can take care of em." The girl suddenly stepped forward, tears brimming in her eyes. "Please," she whispered, "don't make us go." The sheriff looked away. "I'm sorry." "Sweetheart." Jacob's fists clenched, but there was no fight to be won. Not yet. The law took the children that day. Sam cried openly, clutching Jacob's hand until the last moment. The girl said nothing, only looked back from the wagon. Her eyes filled with a kind of heartbreak Jacob hadn't seen since he lost his own daughter when they disappeared down the road. The ranch fell silent. The laughter that had filled the house was gone, replaced by the lonely creak of the windmill and the caw of distant crows. Jacob sat on the porch until sunset, staring out at the empty horizon that night. He lit the fire and found himself staring at the small wooden horse Sam had carved. He picked it up. Turning it in his hands, he told himself he was too old, too tired to raise children, but the ache in his chest told him otherwise by morning. His decision was made. He saddled Dusty, strapped a pouch of coins to his belt, and rode toward town. He wasn't going to let the law decide who those children belonged to. They were his now in every way that mattered, and he'd do whatever it took to make it official. The road to Fort Ponder was long. Dusty and cruel Jacob Holler rode through 2 days of relentless heat, pushing himself and his horse past exhaustion. He wasn't just chasing a wagon. He was chasing the only bit of light that had returned to his life in years, the faces of the children, Sam's grin, little Lily's laugh, and the girl's brave, tearful eyes haunted him with every mile. When he finally reached the orphanage at the edge of town, the sky had turned a burnt orange. The building loomed like a prison gray stone, barred windows, and a tall iron gate that creaked in the wind. Children's faint voices echoed inside. A chorus of loneliness. Jacob dismounted, brushed the dust from his coat, and marched up the steps. "I'm here to speak with Miss Addington," he told the gatekeeper moments later. A thin woman in a gray dress appeared, her eyes sharp as needles. "Mr. Holly, is it? I was told you took in 3 of our missing children." "Not missing," Jacob corrected. "They were found. By me. I've cared for them through the winter, fed them, clothed them, kept them alive." Miss Addington pursed her lips. "That's commendable, sir. But the law is clear. These children belong to the state until suitable arrangements are made." Jacob took a deep breath. "Then let's make those arrangements. I'm here to adopt them." Her expression faltered for a moment. "Do you have kin, Mr. Holly? A wife? Family to help?" "No," Jacob said simply, "but I've got a ranch, a roof, and a heart big enough to keep those young and safe. That ought to count for something." The woman studied him a long while, perhaps weighing his sincerity against the rules in her ledger. Finally, she said, "Very well, the magistrate's office opens at dawn if you can meet the requirements and pay the fees. The papers will be filed." Jacob nodded, tipping his hat. "I'll be here." He spent the night in a cheap room above the saloon, his mind restless. When morning came, he went straight to the magistrate's office, filed every document they shoved in front of him, and signed his name with a trembling hand. He sold 2 of his prized horses to cover the adoption fees by noon. The paperwork was done. Jacob Hawley was, by law, the guardian of Sam, Lily, and the girl who, until now, had no name when he returned to the orphanage. The children were waiting in the courtyard. Lily squealed when she saw him. Running as fast as her tiny legs could go, Sam followed, throwing his arms around Jacob's waist, but it was the girl who stood still, her eyes searching his face like she couldn't quite believe it was real. "Thought I'd lost you," Jacob said softly, his voice breaking. "You came back," she whispered. "Course I did," he replied, smiling through the ache in his chest. "Ain't no law in this land strong enough to keep me from my family." Tears filled her eyes as she stepped closer. "But I don't even have a name." Jacob knelt so they were eye level. "You do now." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "Hawley, that's your name, same as mine." For the first time since he'd met her, she smiled fully, a bright, unguarded smile that lit her entire face. Sam grinned beside her, repeating proudly, "We're the Hawley family now." They rode back to the ranch together, the prairie stretching wide and golden before them. The air smelled of rain and wildflowers for Jacob. The land no longer felt empty, it pulsed with life, laughter, and belonging. That night, as the stars spread across the sky, Jacob sat on the porch with the children asleep inside. The wind was gentle, the moon soft and full. He thought of the wife and daughter he'd buried long ago, and for the first time, he didn't feel the sharp sting of loss. They hadn't been replaced. They'd made room in his heart for something new. He smiled to himself, whispering, "Welcome home, my children." The Hawley ranch, once silent and cold, was alive again with love, laughter, and three small souls who finally had names, a father and a future. It wasn't just a home anymore. It was a family.